Expanding economic reach, China's president concludes some say long overdue visit to the Middle East with the economy at the heart of his tour. But how important is the Middle East to Beijing? And can China remain neutral in the region's many conflicts? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finighan. China's President Xi Jinping is now back in Beijing after a full tour courting key players in the Middle East. During a visit to King Salman in Riyadh, he agreed on closer strategic cooperation between China and Saudi Arabia. In Cairo, Xi and Egypt's President Abdullah al-Sisi signed a document outlining their country's relationship for the next 5 years. There, Xi said he supports the idea of a fully independent Palestinian state, with East Jerusalem as the new country's capital. And his last stop was Tehran, making him the first head of state to visit Iran since international sanctions were lifted. He and Iran's President Hassan Rouhani oversaw the signing of 17 new agreements, including one for the revival of the historic Silk Road trade route. They also agreed to cooperate on nuclear energy projects. And Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said Iranians never trusted the West and were happy to be working with more so-called independent nations like China. Well, a clearly pleased President Rouhani said that discussions with the Chinese leader had covered a wide range of topics.
We are delighted to see this trip taking place at a very appropriate historical time in the post-sanctions era. We decided to increase mutual trade up to $600 billion. To ensure security and stability in the Middle East, we are offering help to countries which suffer from terrorism, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria and Yemen. We are also offering intellectual intelligence to fight terrorism.
We have had honest and fruitful negotiations with President Rouhani, both on the issue of bilateral relations and issues of mutual interest. We exchanged opinions frankly, and as President Rouhani said, we have reached expanded agreements.
Well, the revival of the Silk Road trade route was one of the key agreements that came out of this visit. It's going to be a high-speed rail link for both passengers and cargo that'll go between China and Tehran. That's a 3,200-kilometre route crossing 6 countries in Central Asia. And China is proposing that the route will eventually be extended through to Europe as well. Well, let's bring in our guests and get their thoughts from Beijing. We're joined by Einar Tangen, who is a political affairs analyst. From Muscat, Abdullah Baabood, director of the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University. And from Tehran, we're joined by Mohammad Marandi, professor at the University of Tehran. Welcome to you all. Let's start with you, Einar Tangen. This trip, well, at least the Riyadh and Tehran legs, we're all about oil, right? China's energy security.
Well, actually not. I would probably say it was more about Silk Road. Oil is part of the equation. I mean, the resources need to flow into China in order for it to produce the value-added goods that it hopes to export to other nations. But taking a slightly different cue, it's not looking at this as a zero-sum game. What they're looking for is not only to put in the infrastructure that can move things around, but also to build primary processing and help these countries get a leg up on their manufacturing and economy, because without those jobs, there will be no one being able to buy Chinese goods. Okay,
it's all about buying Chinese goods then. I mean, you talk about this silk trade route. The goods mostly will be moving one way, and that's from China towards the Middle East.
Yes, but that can't keep it up forever. You know, given the decline in current decline in prices for raw commodities, especially oil, there's not a situation where it's sustainable. Obviously, oil prices will not remain low forever, but it does come back to this issue that China cannot sell its goods to people who can't afford them. So they're taking a slightly different page out of this, and they're saying, look, yes, we want your oil, we need it in order to power our economy, but we also need to figure out ways in which we can increase trade so that it's not a one-way type of situation where you you people can buy our goods because you have jobs and industries that are supporting it. Basically, you should look at this as a regionalization of the Chinese model, not necessarily in terms of policy, but in terms of economics.
Abdullah, Baabood in Muscat, apart from oil, what does the Middle East to offer China?
Well, China is an international player. It's a growing power. It's started to recognize its power in terms of economic, commercial investments, know-how and technology. It started to expand beyond its borders and beyond its region. It looks at the Middle East as a strategic route towards Europe and the rest of the world. The Middle East is the main supplier of energy to China and also a natural partner, first in terms of its strategic location, its routes, whether it's Strait of Hormuz or it is the Suez Canal, or, and so on to Europe and to Africa. The Middle East is also plagued with so many conflicts that China would want to see that these conflicts are resolved so that its plans for the Belt and Road, Silk Route, is operating in a very sustainable manner. It's investing a lot of money in this project, and the Middle East is a very important part of this plan. Without the Middle East, China will have difficulty in expanding its links with the rest of the world, especially with Europe and Africa.
All right. So,
and the Middle East is, of course, a huge market for Chinese goods and services and technology, and also it's a main supplier of its energy needs.
What though, would China's new strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia and Iran mean? How would that be translated in terms of a region that is wrapped in conflicts at the moment and civil wars?
China has been very clever not to intervene in the regional conflicts. It's trying to find ways out to sort out these regional conflicts because it knows that it is not for its best interest to have conflicts in the Middle East. China is also a growing, not only economic giant, but also a growing security partner for the Middle East. Although we do not expect that China will play a major role soon, but we think that China in the future will be cooperating with the Middle Eastern countries in fights against extremism, against ISIS, and also in securing its routes to China in terms of its oil supplies and goods and services. And China is already having its own military base or naval base in Pakistan, and it's building its own security arrangements around the region. So sooner or later, China will be a major security player. We are not expecting that it will replace the existing security guarantor, which is the United States, or to that extent, other European powers. But I think it will increasingly play a very important role in the security of the region.
Mohammad Marandi, we've already established then that China is more interested in business and economic affairs. Could it, do you think, navigate the complex political environment that exists currently in the Middle East region? Could it stay neutral all of the time? It's already appearing to side with the Assad regime through its vetoes at the UN Security Council. That's not seen very positively in Saudi Arabia.
Well, the Chinese government has a huge advantage over the United States in the sense that it does not have a history in the region where it constantly interferes or invades countries, and that's a plus for China. The Chinese are developing their ties with different countries, and I don't think that the Iranians have any problem with that. In the case of Iran, though, it's somewhat unique because not only is it an issue of energy going from the Persian Gulf region, but more importantly for Iran is the development of the Silk Road, which goes through Central Asia. Both oil and gas can be exported from Iran and perhaps Iraq as well through Central Asia to West China. And oil and alongside oil and gas, you will have railways as well as highways that will facilitate trade. So it will create a very different economic environment that is very important for Iran. And the fact that both countries are concerned about the rise of extremism, the sort of extremism that we now see in North Africa as well as Southwest Asia, it will be an important issue for the two sides to work together to prevent that extremism from spreading to Central Asia.
Having established relationships then with both Saudi Arabia and Iran, is China in a position to mediate between the two countries? Of course, the great tension that exists between them at the moment. I mean, it has an extreme interest, doesn't it, in seeing these two new partners enjoying at least normal relations?
I don't think the Iranians feel that there is any need for mediation. The Iranians believe that the Saudis, at least from Tehran, the view is that the Saudis have been promoting Wahhabism and extremist groups in the region, and that the Saudis have to end that. And indeed, during the trip to Tehran, members of the Chinese delegation were increasingly concerned about the rise of extremism in southern Yemen, and they were concerned about the fact that extremists that now exist in Syria, who follow the same Saudi ideology in Iraq and in Nigeria, Boko Haram, as well as in Libya, that they could spread these groups, this ideology could spread to Central Asia. So the view in Tehran in that regard is similar to that of China. But I think the Iranians are open to dialogue with China, with the Saudi government. If the Saudi foreign minister wishes to move towards rapprochement, I think the Iranians would move very swiftly in that direction.
Einar Tangen, I mean, I don't know whether you want to comment on anything you've heard so far, but also, what do you think? Yeah. Is China interested in being a mediator between Saudi Arabia and Tehran?
I think mediator is the wrong word. I think you should be looking for excuse me, the referee. You know, quite different from the U.S. American exceptionalism. In terms of my colleague from Russia, I would disagree. I think China has made some very significant moves that has put it kind of a little off-center from where it usually is. First off, calling for an independent state directly with East Jerusalem for the Palestine was unusual. I mean, it wasn't something he had to say, it was something he did. Also, supporting the existing government in Yemen, that was something that might have rubbed Tehran the wrong way, just as it might have rubbed Saudi the wrong way about the Palestinian state. So there was a little give and take, and I think China is trying to signal that it wants to just kind of end all of these ongoing things, that they're not conductive, especially from China's point of view. I mean, you have a situation where, you know, where it's fine for my colleague from Iran has mentioned that what the Saudis have done, but also people outside see signs of activism from the Iranian side in terms of support of the Syrian government, also things going on in other places and support groups. So it's not exactly clean hands on other sides from many points of view. From the Chinese, they really just want to see this kind of ended. The Silk Road depends on a peaceful coexistence strategy. And I don't know when that's going to happen in the Middle East. It may be a situation that is much like when the Christians when the Christians divided between Catholics and Protestants, and it took 30 years of war and about 1/3 of the people dying before they finally came to a conclusion that they were exhausted and that they would have to live with one another. I hope that this will not be the case in the Middle East.
So can Einar, China take a diplomatic approach to the region that doesn't resemble Western meddling?
Absolutely, because the major difference is, I mean, from the American point of view, we always look at things from not collectively, but there are a large number of people who say American exceptionalism. There's a strong ideological component that says you must have democracy, you must have open markets, And also there's a choice of God there. The Christianity hangs very heavy above it. So with China, they come in and it's not any ideology. They're just pushing trade. They're saying, look, can't we get along? Can't we enjoy the fruits of a moderately prosperous society which we can spread around? So it's very different. So when they're coming in, they're not saying you need to change your government. They're just simply, is there a way to find peace? So I don't see them as mediating because they're not going to try to force people to the table. But if there are attempts to try to do it, they will certainly be a referee and they will be more than happy to help any kind of peace process along. It's a very, very different style of approach. It also mirrors what's happening with the AIIB, Silk Road Fund, all of these alternatives, which are kind of a new beginning after the Cold War epoch has kind of come to a close, and the post-World War II edifices, the IMF and World Bank, have kind of receded in importance because of their a little bit unwieldy at this point, way too political, and in many cases of many governments, way too ideological.
Abdullah Baabood, can Saudi Arabia rely on China on the world's political stage? This is coming back to what I was saying a few moments ago to Mohammad about it seeing to be siding with the Assad regime in Syria with its vetoes at the UN Security Council. Riyadh, views suspiciously the growing openness in the relationship now between the US and its regional arch rival Iran. Can Beijing be of any use to Riyadh diplomatically?
I think the Gulf states are at the moment are currently looking at their strategic relationships with major powers in the world and with the US pivot towards Asia, whether that is true or not, or the US change of heart in the region, and encompassing Iran more, especially after the nuclear agreement. There is a fear that Iran will be more emboldened and more empowered, that it will continue to aggravate the situation, which is at the moment very tense. So the Gulf states are worried about more Iranian intervention in the region. And of course, from the Gulf perspective, they see Iran interfering in many of the Arab capitals and many of the Arab politics, and it's not going to be abated. And therefore, they are trying to hedge their bets, as it were, with making strategic relationship with China, with Russia, with other global powers to compensate and balance off any significant change in their relationship with China. Their relationship with the United States. I think China also, as a major power, has its own policy in the region that does not necessarily fit in with the Gulf states, as you mentioned in Syria and perhaps in Yemen. But I think these differences can be overcome. There are also many common areas where in Palestine, for example, the Chinese are very much now involved not only in political terms, but also, as has been mentioned by the other speaker, but also in economic terms in supporting the Palestinian state and Palestinian people. They are also very much involved in Iraq. They want to stabilize the country. So there are many common areas where China and Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf states can see eye to eye. And this is where I think they're trying to work on and maybe isolate the areas of conflict or areas of disagreement, especially the Syrian issue. So I think China will offer a very important strategic partner for the Gulf states, and they are working very hard towards developing relationship with all these regional international powers to ensure that any U.S. change of heart is not going to be at the cost of the smaller Gulf states.
All right. Well, this Middle East tour is just the latest move in Beijing's ongoing push for global influence. President Xi travelled to Johannesburg for the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in December, where he tripled Beijing's development funding for Africa by pledging $60 billion. And China's investing more than $45 billion on a set of highways and railways that will connect it to a port in southern Pakistan. The so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor will improve infrastructure in Pakistan and likely double the country's energy capacity. And President Xi also visited London in October, where he agreed to invest in nuclear plants in the UK. Mohammad, Marandi, we talked about Iran's President Rouhani saying that he trusts independent nations like China rather than the US or Europe. There's no suspicion at all about China's motives then, given the amount that it is investing, not just in the Middle East and in Iran, but all over the world right now.
Well, so far the Chinese haven't shown any activities in this part of the world that would look like what the Europeans and the Americans have been doing for hundreds of years. And of course the revival of the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road between the two civilizations of China and Persia, is something that the Iranians want very dearly. It would completely change the landscape of Asia. And so in that respect too, the incentives for working with China are very great. And the same is true with China. The Chinese see Iran as independent from the US sphere of influence, which is a big plus. Iran has a huge market, and Iran can trade with China both through the Persian Gulf, the high seas, and Central Asia, which makes Iran unique as well. But also, as I said earlier, the issue of extremism is something that the Chinese are definitely very concerned about, and that's something that they've been discussing with the Iranians in detail in Tehran. The reason why both Iran and China supported the Syrian government from the start was because they saw the alternatives that were being promoted by Turkey and other regional states with Western support was a form of extremism that would lead to what we now see. And the Chinese and the Iranians saw eye to eye in that. And indeed, with regards to Yemen, during the Chinese president's stay in Tehran, there was expressed concern about the situation and the rise of extremism in Al-Qaeda and ISIL in southern Yemen. And the fact that after over 10 months the Saudis have been unable to get their way in the country, I think has made people in China think differently about the situation. But on the whole, the important thing, I think, in Tehran is that the Chinese do not want to interfere in the internal affairs of different countries in this part of the world. And for Iran, that will help, the relationship will help boost the economy dramatically over the coming decades.
Okay, Einar, we'll come to you finally here. We're almost out of time. China's President Xi, I mean, he visited more countries last year than President Obama of the United States. What took him so long to get to the Middle East? And is this visit, the one that he's just concluded, yet another mark, if you like, as China expands its rising power in the world?
Well, I mean, this is something that China's doing. Goes down a list, and basically the Middle East is probably the most problematic area in the things, but absolutely necessary to the Silk Road. So if something good is going to happen, the question is when. Now, I would disagree with my colleague from Tehran saying that China agrees with it. They agree with this idea of non-intervention, but I don't think many people in the world think that Bashar Assad is exactly a saint, or that he's taking care of all of his people. So let's put all of those things aside. I think we should be concentrating on what my colleague from Russia said, which is that the sands are shifting. The sands are shifting in terms of the Middle East. The irony is that the U.S. and China will probably be aligned in the future with Iran against the Gulf states if there continues to be this kind of radical Wahhabism being pushed through these madrasas that are being put around the world. Okay. And that's the reality of it. I mean, things have definitely cooled down between Saudi Arabia and the rest.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid that is where we're going to have to leave it. We are out of time. Einar Tangen in Beijing, Abdullah Baabood in Muscat, and Mohammad Marandi in Tehran. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And as always, thank you for watching. Don't forget you can leave your comments on the programme's page at our website, aljazeera.com. You can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan in Doha, and all the team here, thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.